Good evening, folks, and welcome to Library Lovers with Maya Linnell and the Libby app. Now tell me, have you ever put investing in the too hard basket and wish there was an easy way to understand finance? Perhaps you've wanted to know what it takes to get a children's book published or start a podcast. And what about mobile libraries? Are they all beer and Skittles, or are they a librarian's worst nightmare? Now, if that sounds good to you, and it certainly does to me, then grab yourself a cup of tea and settle in for a fabulous night. I'm your host, Maya Linnell. I'm a journalist. I'm the author of 4 rural romance novels with Alan Unwin, and I'm passionate about books, baking, gardening, and libraries. Now, tonight's program is brought to you by Overdrive and the Libby app, plus your local library, bringing you digital content so you can access audiobooks, magazines, and ebooks, all on your electronic devices. Now, I love hearing where you're tuning in from every month, what you're reading, and any questions you might have for our guests. So please put in your comments in the chat box and we'll get to them later. Now, coming up first tonight is Victoria Devine. Victoria is a multi-award-winning financial advisor who is transforming the way we think about money, especially in the millennial age group. Victoria, welcome to Library Lovers. We are thrilled to have you on the show tonight.
Hello, thank you for having me. How fun.
It is great. Now, with a background in behavioural psychology, her own financial advisory business, and a chart-topping podcast, Victoria really understands what makes her generation tick. And she knows how to make hard-to-understand concepts fun, fresh, and relatable. She was also named on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for 2021, and her new novel, Investing with She's on the Money, was released yesterday. Congratulations, yes, Victoria.
Thank you. I'm a mum of 2.
Oh, that is very exciting. And don't they look beautiful as well with those beautiful gold foil dots?
It's literally a dream come true. I mean, I'm biased because it is my book and I obviously got to sign off on the cover, but I do think they're quite aesthetically pleasing. So if anything, like, they're going to look good on your shelf. Like, I've got a bit of a library going on at home and I'm like, oh, this one can go in the middle, not just because it's mine, because I'm like, oh, the green is quite subtle, really nice, looks good beside a bed, 10 out of 10.
Absolutely. And that's not even brushing over the surface of the contents. We've got some great things to talk about. Now, can you start by explaining where you're coming to us from tonight, please, Victoria?
I am sitting in my lounge room. I'm sitting in the lounge room of a rental property that I'm currently leasing because we're renovating my actual house. And it is a 70s dream. I have this beautiful bar. This is Hessian on the walls. I don't know if you can see texture on Zoom, but it is stunning. And I have my pets around me, which is always my favorite thing.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm coming to you tonight from Southwest Victoria in the rural part of the country. And it is very nice to be able to talk to you that Hessian part of the upholstery or the wall decor. It brings back memories of my own childhood home. We had Hessian there.
It's very on trend. I mean, it's very on trend for the 70s, not necessarily for 2022, but that's okay. You get what you get and you don't get upset.
Absolutely. Now, Victoria, there is so much to unpack with your career. Can you firstly start out by telling us what drew you to finance in the first place?
I know what it was. And it's interesting because I grew up not liking maths at all. I hated maths at school. I didn't want to do it. I thought it was the devil. I also wanted to appear cooler than I actually was. So I'd always be like, ew, maths, when every other cool kid said that. But it was actually something I really understood quite well. And it's one of those things that I didn't ever think I wanted a career in it. My dad's an accountant. So I'd been in the space in a way. I was always like, no. If you can see that book moving behind me, I do apologize. I have a small cat who thinks this is new and novel because I only put them there for our questions later. sorry, my love for finance actually came after working in psychology, and people would start asking me questions like, oh, Victoria, when it comes to engagement and culture in a company, it's actually got nothing to do with my my actual engagement or the workload. It's got everything to do with like this external stress of money, or I found out my wife was pregnant and it was a little bit unexpected, and I'm just trying to get through that and put in some extra hours so I've got overtime, or whatever it was. And as a young woman who had never really conquered finance and was in a bit of personal debt herself, I was like, who am I to be talking to these people in their 30s and 40s about money? And so one thing led to another, and I was like, I better get educated because this is coming up and making me really uncomfortable. And one thing led to another, and I just really started loving it. I started going, oh my gosh, like this is great. Like the power in understanding money and the impact you can have by really harnessing it is crazy. And I guess I just fell into it in a way. I felt like I could have a bigger impact using finance than I could using just psychology. And I mean, that's why I got into psych in the first place. It was to change people's lives for the better. And the second I realized I could do that with finance in an even more impactful way, that was it. I moved over, I became a financial advisor, I started working in the space. I ended up creating my own financial advice practice, which I still have today. And yeah, She's on the Money was born.
Well, that's fantastic. I love how you've merged those strengths and that real desire and drive to kind of come up with such a fantastic initiative that has been so darn popular. Just listening to your wonderful podcast on my morning walks along the beach, and I'm hearing about the beautiful ethical investing and the property and your own personal journey as well. Now, how did you actually go from that financial advisory business to then going to the podcast and then the books, or did the books come first and then the podcast? How did
the podcast came first, but before the podcast came a Facebook group, and before a Facebook group came some workshops. So as a young financial advisor who'd just gone out on her own, I needed to find some clients, and I needed to find them relatively fast so I could stay self-employed. And one of the ways I did that was by running workshops where I would go into businesses, I'd hit up all of these HR departments, go, hey, I can come in and talk to your employees for free about financial literacy. We'll talk about superannuation, we'll talk about investment, we'll talk about insurance. I can, include any of your employee details. And they're like, great, you're going to do these free lunch and learns. I called those lunch and learns She's on the Money, because I really wanted to talk to women about finance, particularly because I'd been asked to do a lot of public speaking before that. And a lot of the public speaking I did really spoke in groups to usually men. And I found that the women were the ones coming up after with their questions because they were a bit too timid to put their hand up during the session and ask in front of their male peers, like, oh, I don't really understand super, or oh, I don't really understand this part of the investment journey, because they just didn't want to look silly in front of their peers, right? So from my perspective, I really found this niche where I was like, do you know what? If I spoke just to women, I'd be able to harness the power that I want to, project, and I'd be able to have the impact I was looking for. And perfectly, I would hopefully get some clients that were really aligned to my values. And so I started these workshops, and they were really popular. I loved them. All of the people in HR in Melbourne, they seemed to know each other. So I was being referred to different places, and people started emailing me questions after these sessions. And I would go, oh my gosh, I've been asked this question a million times. I was finding myself going back in emails and just copying and pasting the answers. And I was like, surely there's a better way for people to stay connected with me after. So I thought maybe a Facebook group. I just called it She's on the Money, because at the end of the day, that's what my workshops were called. And people who came to my workshops would join. And so at the beginning, it was a bit lame. It was a bit silly. I felt really dumb. I was, posting these updates. I'd be like, oh, I just finished a workshop and this was the main question. Here's the takeaway, because I wanted everyone to learn. And then I would message my best friend or my mum and be like, can you just comment on that so it doesn't look so lonery? And so that's basically where She's on the Money started. And then people would message me and they'd be like, hey, Victoria, my sister didn't go to one of your workshops, But I love the content and I think she could learn a lot from being in the group. Do you think I could add her? And I'd be like, yeah, of course, the more the merrier. And I remember this number so clearly, I've spoken about it publicly before, the number 1,700 is in my brain because I remember hitting that amount and going, 1,700 people, that's like the most amount of people I've seen in my life in one location, and they all know about my business. That is crazy. And so I asked them what they wanted, and they said, do YouTube videos, Victoria. And I was like, oh, absolutely not. YouTube is so overwhelming. Like I'm not confident enough for that, which seems really hypocritical now, especially today. But I was like, no, YouTube is not an option. I'm not going to make these videos, but I would do voice recordings. And so that led me down the path of looking into a podcast. And I thought, I'll do a 12-segment podcast so that I can get all the information that I think needs to be out there. And then that will be it. And then whenever people ask questions in the Facebook group, I can send them to those 12 episodes and they'll be fine. Obviously, that's not really how it worked out. That was the plan, but it didn't go that way. And something that was a hobby has now become, I guess, my main hustle. And that Facebook group that used to have 1,700 members has grown to now 230,000 members who have more than 1 million interactions each and every single month, which I think is insane. We now have 2 books. Both of them are now bestsellers. Even though we launched yesterday, we're already like topping the charts, which is mind-blowing to me because finance growing up was not sexy. It was not a topic we talked about. In fact, I remember sitting around the dinner table with older family members and they'd be like, Victoria, don't talk about what you're earning or don't talk about what you're spending. So for me, this is a wild journey, but that's how She's on the Money was born. And that's how we've gotten to today, Maya.
I love it. What amazing progress to see, you know, it just go from those workshops.
It was so small. Group.
It's lovely to see. And big congratulations as well on winning the ABA General Non-Fiction Book of the Year 2022 and the Best Personal Finance and Investment Book of the Year at the 2021 Business Book Awards with your first novel, She's on the Money. I was actually in the audience of the ABAs.
Oh, were you?
And I hadn't picked up the first book, She's on the Money, but as soon as I watched your video where you were accepting the speech and talking about it, I thought, oh, this is not at all what I expected because I hadn't listened to the podcast at that stage either. And I thought, oh my gosh, she's young, she's vibrant, she's bubbly. She sounds like fun. I could actually hang out with her and learn stuff. So how did you celebrate this great news? And yesterday hitting the shelves with investing with the She's on the Money and knowing it's already flying off those shelves. What's your celebration go to?
It was a lot actually when we got that award. I didn't know that we were going to get it, right? I knew we were up for the award and I had this Zoom booked because you were there, you know, I wasn't present. It was a video recording because I wasn't able to be there. There were actually a few things going on at that point in time and I was flying out to London that night. And like, I didn't plan for the awards because I didn't think we were going to be in them. Like I literally booked a flight to London and the guys from the award were like, hey, Victoria, we just want to jump on Zoom. And this was like that afternoon, obviously to do the Zoom recording. And they had set me up and they said, look, Victoria, you know, it's just a recording in case you win, because obviously it would be a bit embarrassing if you weren't there. And I was like, yeah, okay, no problems. I'll do it. Bit begrudging because I genuinely didn't think I was going to win. Like I had read the other books. I'm the biggest bookworm. So I was like, oh, these are great. A personal finance book is not going to win this. As I said, I literally booked flights to London and didn't want to go because I was like, why am I here? Not going to win. And right before they hit record, they were like, hey, Victoria, we're going to start the recording. But what we want you to know before you record this is this isn't actually your recording in case like you actually won. And I was like, no, like, ha ha ha. It's kind of like Big Brother, right? Like you never know who's going to win. They do these fake recordings and they're like, no, this isn't a fake recording. No one else is doing this. You are literally the winner. That's why we're recording. I was over the moon. Like I was so upset that I wasn't there. And then later that night, as I was packing to leave, like I obviously live streamed it on my phone while I was packing to go. And I was just crying. I was so happy. It was crazy. And it's not crazy because of the fact that my book won. I think it's crazy because of the community behind it. And that's really what drives the success. It's all of these women who want financial freedom and want this literacy and are in better positions because of the book. And it just makes my heart so happy. Arguably, I don't celebrate these things as well as I could. I celebrated the book award by packing up and going to Europe. And I celebrated yesterday, to be honest, with an entire day of podcast recording, because I am getting married in November and we need to get a whole heap of them in the bank before that happens. And when I got home, I had a glass of very fancy champagne with my fiance. But that was the extent of it. I really need to be better at celebrating my successes, to be honest.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that the books and the podcast are really focusing on that empowering women and really countering that notion that finance is a man's game. I feel that myself as well, and it's so nice and refreshing to be able to speak honestly about that. What type of feedback have you received so far from the readers? Is it similar to what people that were going to the workshops would say and the people in your Facebook community? Is it very similar vein, I'm assuming?
Yeah, a lot of the feedback, you get really beautiful feedback of like, oh, I loved the book. But my favorite type of feedback is when people explain to me exactly why. And a lot of people are saying, or a common theme that comes up is like, Victoria, your books make me feel heard. They make me feel like I am actually being spoken to about finance for the very first time. Like, I've always buried my head in the sand, or I've read a heap of finance books and I just didn't feel like the content was written for me. So one of my favorite things is the feedback that people feel it. They feel my tone of voice. They feel that I'm on that journey with them, and they actually go, no, I can do this, or no, I actually feel motivated. Whereas I think a lot of other finance books, they talk about it. And you know what? There are fantastic finance books out there. I really wish I could pretend that I was the first person to write a finance book. I really wish I could pretend I was the first female to even write it, but I'm not. I think it's just a different tone of voice, a different approach, and it's very much based on behavior rather than just going, hey, Maya, you need to set a budget. We all know that. We know we should be doing that, but it's putting an inner perspective that people are motivated to actually do that as opposed to feeling like it's a chore. So the feedback that we've received has been honestly beautiful. I think I've cried like 3 times today already. Which is really fun. I had to apply some additional mascara before coming on this Zoom because we've had so many beautiful Instagram messages and DMs, and I've had a few emails from people who've got their pre-orders because our pre-orders thankfully went wild. So yesterday everyone was getting it in the mail, and I was a little bit worried, honestly, that the second book wouldn't live up to people's expectations, because the first book obviously has, some pretty big shoes to fill. But no, it's been really beautiful celebrating, especially with the community that I've built.
Wonderful. And I can say as well, Victoria, that as an author, that fear unfortunately doesn't go away, because then when
the worst, don't say that.
You'll be worrying about that, whether it's up to par, but I'm sure it will be. And I'm so pleased to hear that it has had such wonderful feedback already so far in changing so many people's lives. I admit that I actually drew up a budget after I was reading it as well, which I can't even think of the last time that I drew up a household budget. And
how good.
It's amazing. Yes, to look at how much goes on groceries and how much goes on all the different things that you spend, and you kind of just accept without questioning. So thank you.
No, of course. I love it. And I think that was one thing that I made abundantly clear to my publishers, was that not only do I want to talk about it, but we really need to link to tools and resources that people can use for free. And if you've read it, you would know that like my website is riddled with a whole heap of resources people can download literally for free. I've got the budget, I've got the cash flow tool, I have savings hacks, and they're all there so that people feel even more supported on their journey, because I don't want you to just put down the book and have to go and create your own spreadsheet, because most people end up overwhelmed with that. Like, I'll do it for you. I just want you to be in a better position.
That's wonderful. Now, our chat is rocketing along very quickly. We've got a couple of questions. If people would like to ask a question, you can put it into the Q&A button down the bottom of the screen there. Now, Julie has said she loves the movement of the book, thanks to the kitten. Very entertaining in the background.
Sorry, that was Bailey.
And she's wondering whether the book will be available at her library.
Oh, I do hope so. It is going to, I'm pretty sure most libraries around the country, but if your library hasn't ordered it, definitely either request it or tell them to message me and I'll just send it to them.
Wonderful. Now, speaking of libraries, I would love to know whether you happen to have any special memories of your local library or when you were a young girl going to the library.
I spent a lot of time in the library at school. I was basically best friends with the librarian, Mrs. Croft. Like we were on first name basis. Like it was great. But no, a lot of special time in there. I've always been a really big bookworm. It's always been something that my parents really promoted. I remember having book charts on the wall growing up, and mum always being like, if you finish a book, you get a reward. And at the time, I was always like, what is this? Like, why is she trying to reward me by me doing things I love? And obviously, what she was actually trying to do is instill really good behaviors in me. It wasn't actually a trick because I enjoyed it. But at the time, I was like, so if I read a book, I get a gold star. And if I get 5 gold stars, I get to go and get another book. Sweet, this is a really great deal. But obviously my mum had ulterior motives. And then I've always been a bit of a library nerd. I've spent seven plus years at university, so spending a lot of time in uni libraries, but then also my local library. I find that as I'm getting older, I don't have as much need to go into libraries. And I'm ordering lots of books online. However, I now have really young nieces and nephews. And on a Saturday morning, I'm like, let's go grab a coffee and go to the library. And yeah, they're so excited by it. They have different reading groups at my local library. And I'm like, why am I not back here? I don't understand.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, when I'm not writing, I'm a keen baker and a gardener as well. And I've been poring over the new Alice Zaslavsky book. It's called The Joy of Better Cooking. It's coming out next month. And I've made a very delicious lemon and poppy seed cake from this fantastic
who
book.
are you?
So we're going to have Alice as a guest later in the year in November. So I thought I'll quickly pop that one up. But I'd love to know what's happening in your kitchen or your garden at the moment, Victoria.
Oh, look, you guys asked me what was going on in my kitchen or my garden, and I was actually mortified. Most of my houseplants are dead. The flowers behind me, Maya, they're fake.
Well, they look real from here.
Thank you. I actually spent a premium on them so that my house could look fresh, but unfortunately I don't spend enough time at home. But when I am at home, I've brought it. The cat was trying to get into these before. I actually love this book. And it is the Chin Chin Cookbook. It is from a restaurant based here in Melbourne that I adore. And it's funny because you would think after spending 5 years working there, you wouldn't adore it anymore. But I think having worked at Chin Chin during university and, kind of feeling like I grew up there in a little way, and now I work a hop, skip and a jump away from Chin Chin. So, every couple of months we head on over there for a cheeky team lunch. The Chin Chin book is always something I rely on when I'm entertaining. The Chinook salmon in the book is like a salmon. It's meant to be wrapped in banana leaf, but honestly, I just use baking paper and foil because we don't have time for banana leaves in this house. But it's basically a red curry baked salmon, and it is the biggest crowd pleaser you will ever find. That with some steamed rice and greens, people will be raving. So I wanted to share that because if there was something going on in my kitchen, it would be that, my friend.
Wonderful. Look, I can behind a nice steamed salmon with a bit of red curry paste. That sounds divine. Thank you for sharing. And before we let you go, I see there a very familiar cover by an author who I've seen in conversation a few times. Is that Graham Simpson's book there?
It was.
It is.
It was. You guys asked me to pick a book. I actually picked 2 books because I have one that I adore and one that I'm currently reading and adoring. So the one that I'm currently reading and adoring is called Killer Thinking by Tim Duggan, who was the best-selling author of Cult Status, which I adored as a business person. Not for everyone, only because it's obviously a little bit more business-minded. But when it comes to fiction, oh my gosh, The Rosie Project, The Rosie Effect, I have read them multiple times. They obviously had ABO awards as well. And when I look at this, the barcode on the back has worn off. off. This book is definitely a little bit dog-eared and not in the best condition you've ever seen. But that's why I wanted to share her, because she's gone around all of my friends. My sister has borrowed this. I'm pretty sure every man and his dog that I have spoken to about books has either picked this book up specifically or bought their own copy. So this has actually been in my library. I looked into it. I went back in my camera roll. I have had this since 2014.
Wow, that is a good effort, and it is well loved. It obviously takes pride of place on your
Look
shelf.
at it. It's embarrassing how badly. Look at this. That's disgusting. But we like sandwich her between some other books and pretend it's not happening. So it's great.
Look, well-loved books are always a good idea. I think that it shows that it's been used and enjoyed. So it's been lovely having you on Library Lovers tonight, Victoria. Thank you very much for being our guest.
Thank you for having me. What a dream. Enjoy the rest of the evening, guys. It has been a pleasure joining you.
Beautiful. That was Victoria Devine. Her new book, Investing with She's on the Money, is out now with Penguin Random House in all good bookstores and libraries. Now, you can also find Victoria's podcast, She's on the Money, and receive updates about investing and finance on a regular basis, or go and find her Facebook group also under the same name. Now, if you'd like to ask a question, there's a Q&A chat box down the bottom. I think there's a couple of gremlins living in our chat system, but you can ask a question in the Q&A section down the bottom. And Winnie, I can see you've got your hand raised there. So perhaps if you chat it, put the question in the Q&A box down the bottom, hopefully you'll be able to get your question across. Now, our second guest tonight on Library Lovers is another talented writer and podcaster and a very, very enthusiastic champion for Australian authors. Welcome to the show, Dani Vee. We've got you now. Welcome, Dani.
You'd think I'd know how to use Zoom by now, right?
Look, sometimes these little glitches do wiggle their way in, don't they?
They do, particularly tonight, I'm finding, but we will push through.
Absolutely. Now, Dani's picture book, My Extraordinary Mum, was published by Larrikin House in August this year. Her Unlucky Dad 6-picture book series and a short story in a crime fiction anthology are coming soon. Dani is also the host of the very popular literary podcast, Words and Nerds, and she has over 35,000 listeners every month and more than 400 episodes with lots of fabulous authors, including Matthew Riley, Trent Dalton, Jackie French, Tara Moss, Andy Griffiths, and many, many more. A warm welcome, Dani. It's lovely to have you on my show after being on your podcast many times as a guest and also as a guest takeover host.
I know, and it's terrifying being on the other side of the interview, can I just say? I like your side better.
Oh, look, it is nice to try and change. Where are you talking to us from today, Dani?
Look, my study, which I spend a lot of time in, so the day job, the podcast, these live streams, my children should be in bed, but they're not, so who knows what's going to happen.
Oh, wonderful. Well, let's start by talking about your fabulous new book, My Extraordinary Mum. Now, you can tell just by picking up this wonderful book that this is going to be a delight. It's going to be an ode to mums. But how about you tell all the fabulous people that are tuned in tonight all about it, and I'll flip through and show them some lovely bird pictures.
Oh, I like this. Yeah, basically it's about a mum and a daughter who go on these amazing journeys to do sort of unexpected things that, you know, sometimes mums aren't seen doing. So they're in drum circles and she's breakdancing at the supermarket and she's bungee jumping and rock climbing. And I just saw that, you know, as a mum myself, and you can relate to this yourself probably, Maya, I just feel like sometimes there are expectations put on mothers that, you know, we kind of lose our identity. Motherhood is one of the most important jobs in the world, don't get me wrong, but I felt like there wasn't enough space for women to sort of be reclaiming their identity in a lot of mass media. And there's still a lot of traditional mother roles, which is absolutely fine as well. But I just think we are more than a sum of, you know, that one part. And so I wanted to show that in a really fun and joyful way.
Oh, and it certainly is joyous. I read this beautiful book to my little nieces and they are 4 years old and they're twins. And I think I could just see their mum in the background, just kind of grinning away as well, appreciating the fact that it's really championing how fantastic mums are.
Yeah, well, that was kind of one of the reasons. And the other reason was, when I was speaking to my own kids who are 8 and 10, I realized they actually only knew such a little part of who I was. They knew me as mum, and that's kind of all I existed as. And so when I started talking about, I went backpacking in New Zealand for 6 weeks, and if I couldn't find a place to stay, we just pitch a tent. I went to Europe on my own. I've been bungee jumping. They were like, what? Who are you? And so I thought it was kind of cool that you could open up those conversations that, mums have had a life for 20, 30, 40 years before we met. And I just opened up a really nice conversation, and I felt like you could know each other a lot deeper than we had otherwise. It was something I hadn't thought of before.
No, look, that's probably one of those things that you do. You just arrive with that person as your mum, and you grow up knowing them as mum, and then it's a bit of a surprise that they've got all these wonderful, wonderful backstories.
Imagine your mum having a life before you were born, right?
Crazy. Can you tell us a little bit about the process to write a children's book, Dani? Because I know that there would be so much thought that goes into every single word and the placement of the word and the length of the story and whether you rhyme or not rhyme. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
That's the noise of my kids in the background, if you just heard that. So apologies for that. I don't know what's happened in the kitchen. I'm assuming they're fine. What I was really impressed about with this whole process when I was working at Larrikin House was the time, care and energy that they put into creating their picture books. If you haven't been through the process of writing a picture book, you think, 500 words, I could knock that over in a week. Why isn't it out the week after your idea comes out? But we spent a lot of time talking about editing, talking about the story and the characters. And there are a number of versions of the story before we got to this point. And we all wanted it to be the best thing that we could make on that, during that period of time. So I liked the editing period, and I said, just give it to me straight. Whatever you hate, we'll change, we'll get rid of. I'm not going to run out of words. So I was really open to the process because I found it really exciting, and I knew that everyone was on the same page. And so, constantly James, our publisher, is going, what's the buy-in for the kid? What's the buy-in for the kid? And so it really changes the story because the kid is going to need to love this book. We want to create books not only that kids pick up once, but kids pick up over and over again. I mean, those books that your kids will just read repeatedly. They're all over the house all the time. That's the kind of book that you're trying to create. But I was really impressed with the amount of time and energy and care and love that, the team put into all the books they create. And you can tell that, because before I was published with Larrikin House, I loved their picture books because that was so beautiful. The stories are silly and joyful and quirky and wild, but the books themselves, they're beautiful. And I think that picture books are time capsules more than just a book. You read them to your kids, you remember where you are snuggled in a blanket with them, you remember how little they are, and all of those beautiful things that time goes so quickly. And so when you see a picture book that you've read to your kid over and over again, it's a time capsule. It's more than just a book, and you remember those times that are irreplaceable and you're never going to get them back.
I think that is beautiful. And as you're saying that, I'm flicking through the catalogue of children's books that are special to us that we've read over the years. And you're right, it is like a time capsule. I had never thought of it like that, but you've nailed it, Dani.
Yeah, it's really special. And that's why I think, all books are important, obviously, but I think kids' books are particularly special because we take them with us throughout our lives. And, they have nostalgia attached to them. I remember all the books that I loved and what year I was in and the friendship groups I was in and the anxieties I was having. So, they're little time capsules.
That's wonderful. Now, speaking of books, because you have this fabulous podcast that I recommend anytime I do a book talk, I am saying if you like books and you want to write a book, you need to listen to the Words and Nerds podcast. I do mention that quite regularly because it is such a valuable resource on how to write a book and problems people had and plot points. But I digress because really, how do you choose an Australian book recommendation for a show like this when you have so many wonderful authors coming your way so regularly?
It's a great question. And that's why I couldn't choose just one book. So I've got a pile in front of me and I may show them all to you. I may just choose one. I'm not sure yet. It is really hard. And I love celebrating books. And I think our community, the book community, is so amazing because we're so supportive and encouraging of each other. And that's because we all know how hard it is. We all know how hard it is to get a contract. We all know how hard it is to get your next contract. nothing's ever guaranteed. And so I think when any of our writerly friends or illustrator friends get success, we're right there cheering them on with all our energy, because we just know how hard it is to get there. So it's such a great community. I always say if the world was a bit more like the book community, we'd be killing it.
I agree, Dani. Now, I am very interested to find out, which book did you bring tonight that you might choose at the top of that pile, or do you think you'll choose? I'll give you two. Go on then. Oh, wow. Top five.
Well, I'll choose a children's book, and I'll choose, I loved The Brink by Holden Shepherd. I just thought he just writes really raw books, and, you know, they just feel real, you know, they just feel like, I always believe that, you know, heart and soul on the page, thanks to Trent Dalton, is such an important thing to do. And I just feel like Holden just gets all his heart and soul and guts and puts them on the page and turns them into words, and you can feel every word. So that has to get a shout out. I don't even know which kids book to talk about, so I'm just going to hold them all up really sneakily and then just talk about one. But I saw Oliver Pomervan the other day at a literary lunch for CBCA, and oh my goodness, he's just the best at connecting with his audience. Like, his books are so funny, he's so engaging, and I just love the whole package, because I think these days to be an author, it's not, you can't just have a great book, you got to just be the whole package. And whenever you see Oliver performing and talking to like a room full of hundreds of kids and everyone's cheering and engaged, you know, you can't beat that alongside with, you know, his great book. So this is his new one.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. No, I haven't picked up one of his books before, and I have seen Holden's books doing so well as well, and I'm yet to get to them, but I will look forward to it. Now, what I like to find out is your local library. Can you share us a memory, please, Dani, from your childhood or your local library and going there with your kids? What's something that sticks out for you?
Yeah, for sure. I remember my kids were quite close together, so I had two maternity leaves that were quite close together and quite long, and so I used to spend a lot of that time walking to my library with the double pram, and we would go to all the story times, and we would meet the other mums, and the kids would meet their kids, and we'd sing and we'd dance and we'd read books, and we'd honestly be there for hours, you know. And then we'd go and get you know, a hot chocolate, and sometimes we'd come back and they'd have a play area. So it's just one of these beautiful spaces that you could actually get out of the house, because that's, you know, I found that quite important when you're a mum of two very little kids, and you could go out and meet other mums, they could meet other kids, and it was just this beautiful safe space, you know, where you could read or play or talk or whatever. So I have very good memories of that, and I think I would have gone a couple of times a week every week when I was on mat leave with both of my kids. So yeah, I have really fond memories of the library, and my kids still love libraries, so that's a win.
And there's no one at the door kind of, you know, lowering their eyebrows and saying, oh, you've already been here twice this week. Is there? There's none of that. People are delighted to see you walking through the door, whether you've got children, whether you've got your laptop, or whether you're just, you know, looking for a good old book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I find they're really safe spaces and really calming spaces. And I know that, you know, my kids, even at school, when they're having one of those days where they just need a bit of safety or a bit of comfort, they're in the library. And I just feel like they're places, and books are as well. They've always given me comfort in life. It's not a secret that I often suffer from pretty bad anxieties. And, you know, books have been a real comfort to me. And so to do the podcast, to speak to creators, to be on a show like this, I never forget how privileged that is, because to be able to contribute to something that's been such a comfort to me in my life is pretty special.
And I know there are a lot of people out there as well, Dani, that really appreciate your openness about talking about mental health as well, and having that conversation, and, you know, not hiding that side away from people as well, because I think it's really important we talk about these issues, and you make it a really easy thing to do. So thank you.
It hasn't always been easy. I think I lived with anxiety for 20 years before I felt brave enough to talk about it. And I kind of think if I can help someone not do that, it's much better. I don't know if it helps me own it all the time, but I certainly feel less alone. So when you're having one of those, you know, really sort of down times where anxiety is really overwhelming and you know, can't do a whole lot, I feel less alone because people reach out to you. And then I know people, you know, who have anxiety themselves, and I'm like, just come and chat to me. Even if you don't want to chat about it, we'll talk about something else, because sometimes distraction is, you know, the greatest temporary cure.
Absolutely, which leads me kind of slightly segues to something that I find is just beautiful for mental health. Gardening for me is one of those things that I can be out there pruning the roses or pulling some weeds, and all of a sudden the world feels that little bit brighter. But one of the things, it's not always roses and sunshine in the garden, but when things are going nicely, and the springtime comes and there's ranunculus and there's roses and there's tulips and there's all sorts. That's the first rose of the season for my garden. So I'm very excited about that because it feels like the winter months can be quite long, sometimes with no roses and no dahlias. But if that vase reminds you of something, it's because it is on the latest edition of Australian Country Magazine. Not that exact bouquet, because I just picked that one today. But we had Kirsty, who's the Australian Country editor, on Library Lovers a couple of months ago. And I was chatting to her with a little bit of a smile on my face because she and I both knew that there's a whole section here about my garden, which is quite exciting. So
that's super cool.
And the dahlias in there. So I just thought that's my little gardening show and tell for today, talking about that. Have you got something that's happening in your kitchen or in your garden at the moment, Dani?
Look, I love to cook, but I often don't get the time during the week. So I save my special cooking for the weekends, and I love getting my kids involved. So my daughter's a great schnitzel maker. We make dumplings as well. So all of those cool things that, you spend time wrapping and things the kids really like. So our next project is we get a lot of takeaway sushi. We've never made it before, so that'll be our next thing. But I think it's a really nice time in the kitchen with the kids, because doing something and then you can eat it afterwards. We're also really good with those little rolls, those little Asian rolls you have, and you put them, and you kind of make them yourself. So we love being in the kitchen. Look, I'm not a great gardener, but I love having plants in my house. It just makes me feel happy. And I know some of them are really good for you too. So it's not the most exciting plant in the world, but I have a lot of them and I've actually kept it alive. So I'm actually super proud of that.
I'm calling it a win, Dani. Any plant that is not dead is a good plant.
Exactly, right? Exactly. So my daughter's on watering job, but sometimes she forgets. So we have to remind each other. But it's nice to have a living room full of greenery. It's lovely.
It is indeed. Now we've got one of the questions today comes from Olivia. Now Olivia has said, that's so brave, Dani, and also very relatable. And she also agrees that books and gardens are good soul food. Now, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you before we go, because I know we have to wrap up very shortly, but Olivia's got her own children's book coming out in the world very soon. What type of advice would you give someone like that who's going to be putting their very first children's book into the world, from someone who's just done it?
Just done that. Don't underestimate the work involved in it. I mean, there's two things. Don't underestimate. There's so much work you've got to put into it in terms of, book launching and getting on podcasts and getting your book out there. Like, it's half your job, I think, as well as the publisher. So you've got to do all of that stuff. It's really fun, but it's a bit more overwhelming than I thought. But I think the second thing is just spend the time to celebrate it. I mean, it's incredible to get a single book deal. It's double incredible to get another one, and then to see people with your book reading it. This stuff is amazing. And I think just make sure you take the time out to actually celebrate that achievement. I think I was just so focused on going, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? I didn't kind of get that celebratory vibe until I turned up to Booktopia and they had 250 copies of my book. It's more than I'd seen in one spot, and I signed them, and I need to take a moment. And so I just stood there looking at the books and went, yeah, I think I'm just going to have this quiet celebratory moment for this achievement. And it was really nice. And I don't think we take enough time to do that. And we have a weird culture that's like, oh, you have to be very humble, and being humble is obviously a good quality, but I think you can also be proud of your achievements. I don't think saying, hey, I created this and I'm really proud of it, if you want to have a look at it, you can if you like. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think our culture is a little bit weird about that. But I just think celebrate yourself, celebrate everybody else, and why not celebrate everything? Why would you put limitations on what you celebrate?
I love it. I think that is a fantastic note to finish on tonight, Dani. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for watching. And honestly, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Maya, for having me on.
That's my pleasure indeed. That was Dani Vee, the host of the literary podcast Words and Nerds, which is available on all good platforms, wherever you find your podcasts. And she's also written a very lovely children's book called My Extraordinary Mum, which is out now with Larrikin House in hardback and softcover. And you can also find it online through the Libby app. Now, just a reminder that books make great gifts for Christmas. They're really easy to wrap, whether you're a millennial or whether you've got a mum in your life. Two fabulous options that we've talked about tonight. And now it is time for our last guest, and someone who is very dear to me, Janice Nitschke. Welcome very much to Library Lovers. It is a delight to have you on tonight.
Thank you, Maya. It's really lovely to be here, and it was really interesting to listen to your last group of authors, particularly I think the one about finance and the one about children's books. Children's literature is so important, and it really is the building blocks of, I believe, our community. So really glad to have had the opportunity to listen to them.
Oh, beautiful. Now, for those who don't know you, Janice is a librarian. She has been involved in libraries in the Wattle Range Council area in the southeast of South Australia for quite some time. In fact, she joined council as a library assistant in 1968 when she was just 18 years old. And within 6 months, she was running the place, which is wonderful. Janice has committed over 50 years to her job. She's also held many board positions throughout her decades of service, and she boasts a long and impressive list of awards and achievements. In 2014, Janice was awarded an Order of Australia Medal for her services to libraries and the community. And I can personally attest to the delight at having Janice champion my own love of books from a very young age. So thank you, Janice, for being the librarian that I think of every time I think of my childhood experience at libraries.
Thank you, Maya. And that's really very kind of you to say that, because I don't think all the awards that I've been really fortunate to have won, which have enabled me to travel widely and to meet some really exciting people and to have some great peers. I think it only happens if you have a really good team behind you. And my family have been absolutely amazing. So I've had some great opportunities. I'm very grateful for that. And yes, I've been here all of those years, but I've been fortunate to have worked in America and across, as you said, lots of boards. So you are meeting and working with a lot of different people. And I think you bring that enthusiasm and that culture and all of those ideas back to where you work and back to your community. And I think that's what's been important. And I think what underpins libraries is the love of community and developing libraries for community and developing that love of reading. And now I think it's really important also to develop that love of technology that enables people to read the e-audios and the e-books, because that's very important as well in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for people that don't know the southeast of South Australia as well as we do, the Wattle Range Library Service encompasses Millicent, Penola, which other, Beachport, am I missing?
Beachport. So really in the southeast, it's really from Coonawarra through to the coast. I think most people know Coonawarra with its great wine region. Well, then it comes to Millicent and through to the coast at Beachport and Southend. So we're really lucky. We encompass, I think, the best of everything in our Limestone Coast Wattle Range. Yep.
I agree. Now, what does your working day usually look like for you, Janice? I can only imagine just how busy you are with all your different fingers in pies.
It's really interesting because I have a really varied work life, and I think that's why I've probably survived here that long and continue to enjoy being part of Wattle Range Council, because I not only manage the libraries, I also have an A-class gallery that I manage and that I really love, because that's part of bringing the arts into our community, which is very important. Look after the Civic Centre. So it's a whole cultural raft of, I think, activities. But then our library does a lot of work with schools, has lots of important partnerships with unemployed, disability. So I think it's important that libraries are now community hubs, and they are about community. And that's just what I think we all need to embrace. Everybody needs to have that same opportunity to really grow.
That's beautiful, Janice. And I know that I've personally had the pleasure of looking through some of those wonderful art exhibitions that you have there as well as walking into the lovely library with all those beautiful books and the fantastic staff that, you know, call you by name and they can help you find books quicker than, you know, I can even try and work out where they are on the shelf. They can find it for me really quickly. You've got a beautiful team there. Can you tell us?
Sorry.
No, you go.
I just think picking up on that, I think, you know, I'm really lucky because I'm not just actually sitting at my desk. I probably start the day off by going out into the library and meeting people and talking to people about books and about what they're reading. And then you could end up speaking to artists and working through art exhibitions, going to, I suppose, a meeting with the managers or directors. So really, it's a really varied work life, and that I think gives you that enthusiasm for what you do and for building your library.
That's wonderful. Now, the mobile library, I've told the story quite a few times on Library Lovers, just reminiscing about this beautiful big bus. And in author talks as well, I've mentioned it so many times, your mobile library that you used to drive around when I was a little girl at Tantanilla Primary School, this huge, great, big hulk of a bus. And I'm not even sure what type of bus it was. You'd be able to tell me, but it was big.
Well, we started off, we were really fortunate. We got a Crawford Award and we got a small bus, a small van, a bit like a little milk van, and we drove that around to the schools because I thought it was very important that all of our outlying students and community had access to that raft of books and literature that we had. So it started off as being a very big, small book, and then we were able to grow it, which was important, but it turned out to be a very old school bus, and it was just built to hold probably, you know, more books and DVDs and CDs and things like that. And it had no power brakes, and it was really just an old school bus built for a mobile library, but didn't matter because the important thing is that all of the outlying communities of Wattle, of Millicent in particular, from Beachport through to Kalangadoo and Nangwarry, had the opportunity to access all of these resources. And that drove us to provide that outlying service. And we actually drove it into the ground. I think that's just the funny part about it. And that was at a stage where I remember some councillors thought books were no longer going to be important. There was that phase when everyone thought technology would take over books. So we stopped the mobile library, and then we continued services to the schools. So we still go to the schools and read stories and have activities. So we've kept that relationship going, and we've also got a library network with them. So we did evolve. Everything evolves, and that's important. And you embrace what you're doing and you build on it. So that's what we did. Mobile library was brilliant, built on it, and we moved on.
Oh, that is wonderful. Now, I also know that you happen to run a flower farm near Millicent. Can you tell us what's happening in your garden or in your paddocks at present, please, Janice?
I heard you talking about that. So yes, we have had a flower farm for about 30 years or perhaps more. And we replanted, but not a lot. Well, over the last 3 years, we've decided we needed to replant our native flower farm. So we've really grown it, probably planted about 2,000 natives this year, with the idea of making it bigger and more viable, but at the same time, there's so many new varieties. So yes, I did bring this along, and I don't know whether you can see it.
Yes.
But this is what I picked on Monday. So we've just got King Proteus coming out. So it is beautiful. What I like about it, Maya, is probably what you said. It gives you the opportunity to really refresh and think about other things. You can actually lose your mind picking or bunching. I quite like making bunches of flowers. And I can plan my next week while I'm working in the flower farm on the Monday or the Sunday Monday, and come to work and know exactly what you're going to do and where you're going to head. But at the same time, you've been able to get out and do things. I think that's just part of what I really enjoy, is the flowers, and it's beautiful. And you put them in the library and people love them. And I think it brings some outside into the library and gives people something to talk about and enjoy. So yes, that is my other part of my life, which I do really enjoy. And it's a family part. So I think it's always important to work with families. My garden is probably not like yours, Maya, but I do like gardening, and I know that when I have time one day, I'll be able to do more gardening and cooking. Yep.
I bet it is beautiful as well. And even just driving past and knowing that all those beautiful flowers are just beyond that fence there, it makes me smile every time I drive past. Now, can you please tell us, Janice, how can people get in touch with Wattle Range Libraries? Is it online, or do you like when people call in with questions?
It's online, and we've also got a Facebook page, Millicent Library Gallery. So if you go to our Facebook page at present and Instagram, you'll see the Wattle Range photographic exhibition that we opened on Sunday, so we had 328 photographs, and it was just a brilliant day with about 70 people coming along. So yes, go to our Facebook page. You can give me a ring. I don't mind, whatever you like, just to have a chat. That's really, really important.
Oh, lovely. And before we sign out, Janice, I'd love to know a book that you've been reading recently that you can recommend, if you've got an Australian book.
We were lucky to have Matthew Spencer come along, an Allen Unwin author. And so I read that, and I think it's really important to recognise and to encourage, and here it is, yes, new Australian authors. And we're ever so fortunate to have the publishers promote books and to have the authors come. And it was just lovely to meet him, a new author. And I just feel that, you know, I'm looking forward to his next book. And to think he wrote it around the school that he used to live in. And it was just interesting to hear him speak about living in a school and the Melbourne River and the murder that occurred in the school during the school holidays. And he just took you on that journey, and he was an absolutely delightful person. We had about 40 or 50 people come along to the launch, which was brilliant. Not a patch on Maya's when we had like 100 odd, which is brilliant. But it was just lovely to meet a new emerging author. I also like Fleur McDonald. She's travelling at present. And that's just absolutely something different, just a rural romance, but very popular with our authors. And the other one I started off, we've been doing some resilience work at Wattle Range Council. So the Resilience Project, I'd read it before, so I've been rereading it as part of what we've been working through at Wattle Range. So we had a video, and then we've been working through some positivity at Wattle Range. And I think that's probably as a result of coming out of the COVID, when people all are just feeling quite different. And even in libraries, I've found people are coming back to libraries slowly, but they come back in a different manner. So that's the three I have been looking at, reading.
Oh, wonderful. And I'm going to put in a quick plug for Minnie Dark. Now, Minnie is a Tasmanian author, and she writes she writes under several different names, but this one is a really lovely, fun, light-hearted romantic comedy, you'd call it, With Love from Wish & Co. by Minnie Dark. And it's also available on audiobook. And because I loved that one so much, it only came out last month, I've been listening on the Libby app to her audiobook for her last novel that she wrote, which was called The Lost Love Song. And that is divine as well. So if people are looking for a nice feel-good read, then they can pick up some Minnie Dark. If they would like some crime, they can go for Matthew Spencer. If they'd like some nitty-gritty fiction, they could try Holden Shepherd, as recommended by Dani. Or if they wanted something really feel-good and nostalgic, they could pick up Graham Simpson with The Brosy Project. So thank you so much. And I might just
say, just 1 minute, the Libby app, Libraries SA app is absolutely brilliant. Take a look at that, because it has Libby, it has Overdrive, it has all of those on it, and it's something you can pick up, you can use at home.
Oh,
my plug for Public Libraries, South Australia.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for being our guest tonight, Janice. It's been lovely chatting to you.
Thank you.
So that was Janice Nitschke, a librarian, a flower farmer, and a bookworm enabler since 1968. A very big thank you, guys. This brings us to the end of our show tonight. It's been a pleasure, as always, to have you as our audience for Library Lovers with Maya Linnell and the Libby app. So as well as a big thank you to you guys for tuning in tonight, I'd like to thank our guests, Victoria Devine, Dani Vee and Janice Nitschke from the Wattle Range Councils. Also like to thank event sponsors Libby Overdrive, providing you with all your audiobook, ebook and magazine needs digitally, and libraries across Australia for being such great advocates for good books and particularly Australian authors. Now, next month, I have a very, very big treat in store. I hope you're excited. I'm excited. We have Jane Harper coming along to talk about her new book, The Exiles, which came out this week. Now, the link, I've just popped the link also into the chat box there. Thank you, Gloria, for the prompter about that. But if you can't find that particular link or you haven't cut and pasted it right now, then you can just head to the Eventbrite website, or I'll always keep the little link in my profile on my Instagram or my Facebook page, so you can have a little look there. And then, as well as having Jane Harper on the October 19 show, we're going to have Richard Pritchard, and he's an illustrator and the author of Australia's first Indigenous superheroes book series for children, Wheeler the Koori Warrior. We're also going to have a chat to Nadia from Brisbane Libraries in Queensland to find out what's shaking up their corner of the country. And then if you'd like to chat more books, if you can't get enough books, then make sure you tune into Ben's book club, Ben Hobson. He's going to be speaking with New South Wales author Petronelle McGovern about her new release, The Liars. And I've recently read that one and it was fabulous as well. So real crime, edge of your seat thriller, with a slight whale thread as well. So you'll learn a bit about whales. I know I certainly did. Thank you very much for being here tonight, folks. I've been your host, Maya Linnell. I've loved spending the last hour with you. Stay warm, stay well, and read more books.